I've been cleaning my mother's house a lot, and I can't find the cigarettes I bought. 1 second. They weren't in my jacket, and it's just so fucked up. The thought of, like, me worrying that he has someone in my house, rearranging things. And I know that I was cleaning, and I don't need to smoke anyway. It's a disgusting habit, but just to feel so alone, to feel so lost. But I thought it prudent for another psychic lesson, I suppose. Anyone who's been watching these videos know that I have a great watershed of information on this channel. And it's all legit. It's all totally authorized, right? And so the argument being that, what does he say? Aleister Crowley, if too much wisdom hath made me mad. That's the other side of it, I suppose. We hope you would give us plenty of, rubber cores to chew on. Something like that. But it's important for us to understand what's occurring. It's important for us to understand, why it is the way that it is. And of course, they say that Harvey's scarred up too, but maybe he's not scarred up, and that's like, okay, that probably makes sense. Where he's not. Well, maybe he is. They could both be. There's a reason he behaves the way he does too, I'm sure. And so now, right, his ex-wife is married to Adrian Brody. Pretty funny. Pretty funny. Clairvoyance always comes at a cost. I would guess that most anyone can hear it. Most anyone can, when it's like intuition or it's like a dream, it just kind of passes over your mind and you don't think anything about it, But for me, as far as like what spoiled Tribeca was just that there was too much time. He was too zealous. He was too... Rachel, that's the point. That's the point. Right? That this was always about the women, and when he denied me the right to bring a woman, and I know they all love that, the more I think about that, they all love that. I said, oh, this is great. This is great. She's cool. She's probably really talented too. She could be in the movie as well. And I could still marry a stepdaughter, it's not, right? But the cost of clairvoyance is discipline. Right. Oliver Sacks espouses gracefully on this in his career. That something typically happens, and of course him being a neurologist, his typically focus on brain traumas that yield virtuosity or et cetera, right? But, guy hits his head on a swimming pool and then he can play anything on the piano, like these things happen, And so, right, when your soul has no choice but to recalibrate itself, but to find a justification through occulted ways, not in traditional ways, that typically is a good breeding ground for clairvoyant faculties, for extrasensory perception. Because the truth of the universe is that mind is everywhere, right? Which is not, it's not like that anthropomorphic rabbit in David Lynch or on Beverly Hills, It's not like, that's not how it works, It's a quality, it is a truth, right? The truth of stillness, be still, right? Within every cubic centimeter of space, however big, however small, is irrelevant. It doesn't matter how big it is, right? That everything that can be manifested exists within that, right? As a sub-quantum, supra-quantum hologram. Right? Everything's perfectly nested inside of each other. If you have a hologram of an image, it doesn't matter what it is, call it a rose. Right? War of the Roses. But if I take a hammer, right, there's like one rose, and then I go wham, and I break it, right? In the pieces, they all have the whole rose. And so now it's 9 pieces, right? And then if I wham, But now it's 81 pieces. There'll be 81 full roses. Right? So, right, this is the holographic model of creation. Right? That all of, and the image degrades the more like you separate it, you know? I don't understand how they make holographic images, but again, this is not me, right? This is a real book, right? Michael Talbot, right, who also, it's called The Holographic Universe, right, who also had very similar experiences to what I'm experiencing now as far as group meditation, psychic occultism. And he died of cancer a few years after publishing the book, if that tells you anything, right? Is it correlated? I would say it's obviously correlated, though I cannot prove that, right? But the hologram is God, right? It's God, right? It's like it's like above Kether, Ein Sof, Ein Sofar, right? It's this, right? It's this pure divinity, cold, right? It's a sterile androgyny, right? And so when that condition, right, seeks to exercise, emerge out of rest into motion, right, it degrades its perfection through motion. And this is, we see this very clearly in the works of Buckminster Fuller, the science of synergetics, that the vector equilibrium is, right, the geometry of God. It's a pure, everything's the same. All the radiating vectors from the volumetric center as well as the edges that define the convex hull surrounding it. They're all the same length, all one. There's no ratios. It's all one. Everything's perfect. Right? So this is what Bucky says himself. He says nature abhors perfection. That it's too sterile. It's not, right? So it corrupts itself through motion. Right? And the vector equilibrium collapses through the platonic solids, which we see mirrored in the chemical structure of the entire periodic table. And so this occurs through varying pressure conditions, which are physical analogs to the intellectual notion of thinking. Again, it's not a creature, it's a quality that is behaving, right? And so when the idea is sought, right, in the mind of God, right, right, that quality begins to collapse space towards the focal center, the pineal gland, right, of, right, the thinking thing that we call God, right? So whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, it's called many things, many cultures, right? As it is considering its manifestation, what it wants to see, right? Space, it's drawing space into a specific point, right? Through occulted means that we can never fully understand until the electrical pressure from space grading its friction against itself becomes so great it can no longer remain in Earth space and erupts into matter. This is how everything comes into being. Right, that it emerges out of dust back into dust, alpha to omega, right? Stillness, motion, stillness, right? It's a parabola. Right? And so we say, okay, that's all fine and dandy. Right? But how does it work? And of course we're stepping on real, we're on the frontiers of consciousness right now. That's all I can say about that. But it is my contention that space has three spatial dimensions, X, Y, Z, right? That through the collapsing of space from the outside to the inside, right? That the arrival at the material, whatever it may be, is a reflection of the manner in which the celestial accordion collapses, right? And so if it's like there's a lot of pressure like coming from this corner and maybe a little less coming from this corner, right? It yields one thing. And then right, on and on and on and on and on, this idea goes. This is Johannes Kepler, right? The nesting of the spheres, right? If you reduce their orbits to a perfect circle, right? All of the platonic solids nest inside of each other, and the planets of the orbital pathways of planets, if reduced to a circle. And of course, the circle's sterile, isn't it? That's why it's an ellipse. But that's how, right? So it's like, okay, this abstract thing is thinking, right? And as it's thinking, right, it's collapsing space to the focal center point of its concentration through a specific manner, right, which is a geometric angular, right, subdivision or collapsing, right? And it's through the relationships of the varying interchange of electrical pressures, right, referred to in geometry as the dihedral angle, the angle that two faces sit respective to each other, right? This is what allows specific things to manifest, right? And that's it. That's the whole formula, right? It seems like a lot, but like it's actually really not, right? And so inevitably, you always end up with the same question, right? Which came first, chicken or egg? I can remember when I was in New Orleans, I ended up bickering at this guy because I was like upset at these rednecks across the way, but he was going on and on about atheism, and I was like, do you think that life is accidental? Like that's like really what it comes down to. Right, that you could say that, right? So there's thought and there's motion, right? Which came first? This is the chicken or the egg, which came first? I would say that thought precedes motion. I would say that that's my worldview. I can't ever know. We can never know. Right? Moments of spiritual rhapsody, it's too convoluted. It's not like crystallized enough. Right? But this is my worldview. Right? And so if you want to say that life has no meaning, then what you're saying is life is accidental. Right? And so, right, since we don't behave accidentally, right? We behave with intention. We behave with free will. Right? That's right? And so this touches on astrology in a really nice way as well, that some people say we have no free will, right? And so if life is accidental, then likely we don't have any free will. Because it's a haphazard convocation of things. And we're all just like cogs in this like arbitrary, disgusting machine. And so that's a lazy answer intellectually. I think that's shallow intellectually. Devoid of truth, devoid of spirit. And so what does this have to do with Quentin Tarantino? What does this have to do with the movie critic? Right? Of course it has everything to do with Quentin. Right? Because of how he is. Right? He and I are similar. We live in our minds because, right, we're fucked up in our bodies. Right? But that's... Right? So, but my point is that, right? It has everything to do with Quentin because of how he is, right? We're so close, he and I. It's just burying me in it. Like I don't know. All I can do is talk about it. I don't like the idea of being the way that I am. Maybe it was all some sort of like sick joke, to see if I really did have the balls to like tell everyone, like I don't know. It's stupid. I put it on paper right there. Right? But you don't get like, this is what I was talking about with my therapist. They have there's these yogis that live like in caves in Tibet, and they can raise the temperature of their hands to like 200 degrees. Right? They can like sous vide water with their hands. Right? And so how is it that you can do that? Right? But because they fucking meditated for 9 hours a day for 40 years. For 15 hours a day for 40 years. That's the point. Right? It didn't just come to them. Right? That they have mastered their body to such an attenuated degree as a result of mastering their mind even more so. Joseph Campbell teaches us that the Kundalini awakening, right, it has nothing to do with the symbols. It has nothing to do with like meditating on the symbols, right? It's a psychological understanding, right? That all of life, right, stems from a primal abstract intellectual origin, right? And all of your thoughts, all of your mechanical expressions of your body, all of the dignity of the precession of the equinox stems from the same idea, right? And so a clairvoyant is someone who has the ability, right, to reason with his highest faculties in his mind, which typically results from, right, having some sort of trauma that they've had to process. That's the point. right? And so if you read my novel, right, if you read the novel, and Sarah asks him, like, how did you get into it? Because he, like, brings her up and turns her out. And he says, oh, I had a twin brother, you know, and he died in a car accident, right? And so that's, right? And so Max began his spiritual journey to find his brother, you know, to find that thing that he had lost, you know? And then once he found it, he felt that it was disgusting and he let it go. As far as communicating with his brother, you know, as far as seances, you know, Ouija boards and all these things. He felt that inevitably the only thing that can be occurring is that I'm holding my brother back. And so Max lives the same way that I do. Right? And Quentin has been living the opposite way. I don't, you know. L.A., you know, he must be a child of L.A., isn't he? That he's always pushed his mind out into everyone else's because he doesn't want anyone in his mind, because he doesn't want to make peace with how he is in his mind, you know. And I rest in the psychic landscape, having no secrets, knowing that I don't need to go out there because it's all like there's nothing there. Be still and know that I am God. And so, right, the celestial Zephyr, right, that you, like as a clairvoyant, right, that once you arrive at a particular level of understanding, you can actually start manipulating the physical universe in a real way, right? And this is something that every adept knows, right? They all know this isn't, right? This is old hat, right? This is not, right? It's been around for a long time. Right? Jesus walked on water, didn't he? Right? Right? So that's the metaphor. Right? All religious insights are metaphors and allegories for some quality within ourselves. Right? Blessed are the meek, for their inheritance is the earth. Right? The point that he's making is not like don't be a pussy because you have the grace of God, but that's kind of the point that he's making. That you don't have to be arrogant, you don't have to be crass, you don't have to be ambitious. You don't have to be anything other than wise and loving, right? And live in the embrace of the Father's arms, you know? That's, right? This is the point that he was making the whole time, right? This is why he destroyed the temple and never trading in it, and all these things, right? It's not to, right? That you can walk on water when you walk in the light of the Father, you know? That's the point. And so for me, right, in the beginning, you know, I had my spiritual awakening on the day of Quentin's wedding. But thereafter, I continued. You know, it's like, okay, like I'm going. 2020, you know, the Rona. I had a house in Norwood. And so I was painting houses. This is outside of Telluride. And I didn't go into work. I was really depressed. So I said, okay, I'm going to meditate. I'd been reading Buckminster Fuller's Synergetics. I think I was on the second one by that point. And I said, okay, I'm going to conjure this in my mind. Right? That's the beginning of clairvoyance. You get it? Right? And so I'm meditating. And sure enough, boom, there it was. Right? I saw it manifested. Like, boom, the whole thing, like from the top down, right? Right? That I was looking like out. And this is the top, right? That's the bottom. Right? And then I just kept looking at it. And then, boom, it collapsed. The whole thing collapsed because it breathes. You know, it's like an arrhythmia. Boom, boom, boom. Jitterbugging. That's what he calls it. Right? And when that happened, my heart rate, I got like flushed, and I had like a bunch of blood, just like really exciting, you know. It's like, oh, cool. And that's it. That's the magic, you know. That's the magic, right? Then not only can you conjure something in your mind and thereby in anyone else's mind, right? You can make it move. You can make it behave, right? Just like God. You get it? And so if we take the time, right, since we're just like talking about psychic destruction, Very funny, my celestial vision board. Right? Here's your pussy, Mikey Madison. Right? That if we say, well, we're just all the way down the rabbit hole right now. Man, I'm the only one in the world who can do this shit. Right? If we say that the structure of the vector equilibrium, and all of geometric forms on some level, right, can be correlated to a specific chemical structure of material, right? Then, if you are remote viewing in someone else's mind, if you are observing them, right, as a psychic, this is the whole point of the last scene of the novel, right? And you can emboss the vector equilibrium over some part of their body, right? And collapse it into the specific frequency dihedral, right, that corresponds to a specific chemical structure. You can magnetically, archetypally imprint, right, that material inside of the target. That's the point, right? This is why I've been talking about this for so long, right? And I know that he doesn't think about these things, but I do. That's the point, right? I thought about this in 2021 when I first got to LA. That I was like fasting because I had no money, and being a child of the compass, like a disciple of geometry, I had this thought, and I wrote a whole bunch when I thought about it. I had this thought like, oh, cool, like if I could look up the geometric structure of food, of like carbohydrates or whatever, right? If I could meditate on that, right? Mastery, I feed my body thereby. Right? How many instances are documented of people not eating or drinking for decades in the holographic universe? Right? More than one. Right? And that's how they do it. That's the point. Right? And so this is why, right? This is why you'll see documented cases of people healing the sick, because it's a glorification of God. It's like this beautiful divine like channeling. But on the other side of that, right? On the other side of that idea that I just espoused, right, which Sarah exacts with lethal efficiency upon Alistair Hoffman at the end of my novel, right, is that, right, we ain't gonna hear about this one, but it doesn't mean you can't do the same thing to destroy someone, right? And so this is the fear, right? Like that's the fear, everyone. That he's, right? It's disgusting. It's the most disgusting thing ever. Knowing that I never cared. I never cared about the women. I don't care about the role. You just, right? You just pay me $1 million. Pay me $1 million. He's got 500 million, right? WME, Sony Pictures, they got billions of dollars. Right? And so my point is that, right, obviously this is about more than the money. I don't know what else to say about that. Beyond that, everything that I'm saying is true, right? Are there however many people in the world who could understand these things? It's not a big number. It's not a big number, right? But the people who know, right, of course, they see what I'm saying and say, yeah, that tracks. That tracks in a big way. That makes sense. It's not hubris. It's wisdom. The highest levels of clairvoyance is raw logic. That's the point. That's the point. And so, in the spirit of that understanding, in the spirit of 2 years of this, of just going on and on and on and on and on, it has to be about something, it has to, right? Is it what's the, is it that everyone is evil, if that's cool, if that's true, then just let me be a hermit and live in a cave. Just pay me, right, for my pain and suffering. Because you've made all the money in the world. And at the very least, right, you pay me in allowing me, right, to speak the truth to power. Right? And I know that none of these women are interested in me saying, this movie is a monument to his genetic infertility. Right? That's then they're all saying yeah, we indulged a eunuch and allowed him to lose his mind. That's there's responsibility is across the board. Right? And so, right, if everyone's not evil, right, then how can you all still indulge him? How can, he's manipulating me right now, Right? Psychic lesson's over.